Well, let's see. Let's open it up for any kind of opens that anyone has. Nothing's happened in the last 2 weeks related to tools.
Do we want to go over the status of the tool chain maintenance? Do you have any other updates on that, Sean?
So I think my hope was that the stable tag the only person who's responded right now is Andrew, signing up to do Clang that I've seen, or sorry, Xcode. I haven't written.
So for
go ahead.
For Visual Studio, I guess 2019 and 2022, is that something that you're wanting to help maintain?
Yeah, I was going to sign up for that.
Okay.
I think we're happy to do Visual Studio most recent and -1.
Okay.
It's kind of our strategy.
So 2017 and 2015 would need other volunteers.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think we should give that maybe another week. Maybe I'll go ping the RFC thread and say that we'll give it another week. But at that point, I'd start preparing a patch set that kind of pulled everything else out. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to get a response from somebody on the GCC ones and actually per architecture, right? And even for Visual Studio, does 2022 support ARC64 fully?
So I think the real problem isn't in Visual Studio, it's that we don't have all the assembly files needed to make it work.
Right. So for running, but for building, it will build, right? I mean, it supports building things without assembly.
There may be some unresolved externals that wouldn't. I know that there's some packages that don't work, but we do run it on a lot more packages on ARC64 internally, so we should be able to kind of pull together that list. That's kind of I haven't seen much movement on the report suggestion, but so I will pull together kind of a report, and then my hope would be that we would call out each package and each architecture, and then from there we can have a report per tool chain.
Right, but as far as the tools def maintenance, you're going to need tool chain plus architecture and have an owner, right? Because, for example, on GCC, I don't think the GCC RISC-V owner will be the same as the GCC ARM owner.
Fair. Okay.
So I think maybe that's something we can do in the in your reminder on the RFC is break it down at that tool chain plus architecture that we need, maintainers identified.
You think it's just a tuple we put at the top of the file that has that, followed by the maintainer?
Yeah, we can figure out the format of that. I don't know. We've got our maintainers text format today that goes at the kind of file level, but this is kind of like within a single file, who's the maintainer for the different, tool chains, but probably something along those lines at the top of the tool stack, yes.
Okay. I will try to get that out this week, and try to get an example report for something like VS 2019 or 2022, just so people can comment on it.
Okay.
The other kind of recapping from 5/23, which I think was our last meeting, the incremental build error, that was an error and a change that we had only in Project Mu, so that has been resolved, and nothing in EDK2, so that's great. The spell checker, we have not seen any more problems. I think Michael, did you get the commits in for locking it to a version?
Yeah, we're locked to a version, but the commits to fix all the problems are not in. I think the decision was made to not put those in before the stable tag. So we'll need to revisit those if we want those problems fixed.
Okay.
I think the changes that got in were just locking it to the older version to not cause the new problem. And then I expanded the common words list that's available to every package to include a lot more words to reduce the likelihood of this happening again. I believe the compound words value also got changed so that it will recognize compound words. Many of the words that it was failing were, I believe, compound words, but not all of them. There were definitely some like just straight up typos missed in the previous versions.
Okay. And I think what we've talked in the past, Mike, around after a stable tag, it might be good to go back and revisit a lot of our external dependencies, like versions of CSpell, versions of Node, versions of the other tools we use, and try to get them updated kind of as a first month after a stable tag kind of operation.
I agree. That is the best time to introduce changes in those things. You can even start the conversations of those before the stable tag, so that when the stable tag is completed, you can then have the plan for what tool updates you want to do.
Okay. All right, we're still tracking the bug in Python, and there hasn't been any movement on that, unfortunately, yet. We're still trying to get someone to review the PR and fix that so that we can move back to Python 3.9 or 3.10. So that's unfortunate. And then I think the last topic that's kind of been ongoing is this containerized builds. I think there's been a lot of progress for GCC-based Linux containers. And I think there's a patch either on the list or going out that will update the build files, the Azure pipeline files, to use the container instead of the Azure supplied VM. And I think our belief here is that having a container under our control, under this project's control, will make it easier to carry the right versions. So if anyone has not checked out the container repo, it is up. It has a container in it. It's publishing containers on Fedora, I believe. And the plan is to start to use that. With that, I have nothing new to add.
So, Sean, this is Mickey. One of the things that we talked about in the stewards meeting that I was going to bring up here is the possibility of figuring out something to do with versioning our components better, or maintaining, some sort of an idea of what version of components we're actually building. And to that end, the very same day that we discussed that, I got in the EDK2 request for comments is a patch for doing a software bill of materials. So I have invited them to come and speak to the community on July 7th at the 7:30 p.m. meeting. So if anybody would like to attend and be a part of that.
Okay, sounds good.
What other topic, Sean? I know that we've had an open about getting up to Ubuntu latest for CI. I think I saw that there was some more data on trying some of the latest versions of everything, and I don't think it got positive results. Any suggestions on how we make better, faster progress on that?
I think that's the reason we wanted to jump to containers. So at that point, it won't matter what the VM image has as far as what version of Linux, and the tooling environment it provides. The container that Chris and Oliver have been testing out, there's two of them. One is a larger container that contains all of QEMU as well, so that you can run the platform CI build processes we have that use QEMU. And then one's a little bit smaller and is for our core CI. It doesn't contain QEMU. And so those two containers, I think, they've been able to move to GCC 12, although it sounds like RISC-V is now breaking. But they've been able to move to much newer versions of the OS, the host OS and the tool chains.
Okay, thanks. That helps.
I don't know if we wanted to talk about it here or not, but there's the issue on the mailing list we were talking about related to including changes for DSC files by default in platform packages. That might have implications on the build tools depending on how we want to handle that. This would be like someone introduces a new library class and people don't want to review 12 EDK2 platforms patches to integrate that new library class into their DSC files.
I'm curious how everyone feels here. I think I've told Michael offline that the includes for DSCs for this library class mapping, personally don't really like them. They make it harder to track down, how your libraries are mapped. It's hard to figure out if a library really is common or if it's a place for abstraction, and many of the EDK2 libraries are unfortunately both. So it's not always clear if you should have, or if you can all use the same instance of the library.
Well, I think that there's maybe times where it's okay to use it from that include, and that would be the cases where there is only one mapping. I mean, it seems kind of like, a lot of extra work that if, for example, in one of our, more root packages like MDE package, if you introduce a new library class for which there's only one instance, and that one instance is effectively compatible with all platforms, adding that one mapping to a common location definitely eases the platform integration. If instead it's a library class where it's intended to be platform specific, then doing the default mapping in that inc file doesn't make sense, right? So I think it depends upon the library class and how many instances you expect.
I mean, I think so. You're saying that the heuristic would be that if you find only one instance, that you should just be able to default map it.
Not quite that well. It's if there's only one instance and it's not really intended to be a platform specific implementation, because there's many places where, for example, we have a null instance in order to support our builds, but platforms, for example, may not be able to boot if they use the null instance. So that would be an example where there's only one instance, maybe in the repo, but you wouldn't want to add it to the default mapping.
Yeah, I mean, I guess where my head's been at the same thing is it might be nice to classify libraries when you create them, so you know whether the intent of them is to be using libraries so that you share code and don't have to copy and paste, versus using libraries as an abstraction point.
So I don't know, Michael, from your perspective of the challenges you've seen in updating some of the platform DSC files. Do you think the use case where I described, where having a common DSC include for the common mapping, would that have helped, or would that not have helped some of the scenarios that you've been looking at?
For this particular scenario of variable flash info lib, that would be okay because it's single instance. It's essentially helper functions that are distributed across different modules in MDE module package, with the potential to be shared outside that package if someone's writing variable related test or functionality. But I think that there's cases where I guess what this kind of falls into is a private library class, for example, that people might not need to specify inside the platform DSCs. If that was available, I think that would have been an option that could have been used. Because I mean, in this case, the goal really was to just make that functionality available across the different drivers, whether it's variable PEI, all the flavors of variable SML and variable Dixie, and even the FVB driver, and all across there. So that was the goal here. So I think that would work fine here. The confusion, I guess, and the main reason I want to bring this up is at least that we write down what we want to do, because I think it wasted like 3 weeks of debating on the mailing list how to handle this. And if this doesn't seem like that uncommon of a scenario. And I've seen it handled many ways. I've seen people sneak stuff in and update DSCs. I've seen people create new DSC include files, and there's been all types of variations that have been done. But in order to make EDK2 stable tag integrations more consistent and to reduce friction in the code contribution process, I just would like us to define how we do this and just write it down. I don't even necessarily at this point care how it works. I would say that DSC includes do get convoluted if they occur at several layers. And that's usually what happens is eventually you get several layers of DSC includes and then they override each other. And a lot of people don't know how to follow, either they don't know or it's just tedious to follow all the layers of includes and figure out what's going on. So that's been my experience with using a lot of DSC includes before.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
in some ways too, it kind of feels like we're looking for a behavior that's like, use this as a default if you don't have another mapping, but we don't have a way to sort of specify something as a second tier citizen.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why I was thinking we might want to make a build file change or some build tool change related to this, maybe to help. Maybe we're missing something that we need inside like the DSC file.
It kind of feels, yeah, I was thinking that too, right? It kind of feels like we change something, right? Because we have nested dependencies, right? So we have a project that builds and it's pointing at something. That something adds a new dependency, so that dependency gets inherited by the DSC file, right? And something needs to get resolved, or it's just not going to compile because there's a missing thing, right? It's that sort of inheritance case. We're looking for a default, right? So things keep building, but at the same time, you're right. We get into these complexities as of the nesting and whoever goes last wins kind of thing, or whoever
Yeah, I mean,
gets more specific wins.
Yeah, my suggestion on the inheritance thing would be to set up some rules, and yes, it would take things like checkers to make sure the rules are followed. But I think if you're looking at a platform or a package DSC file, the idea that near the top, probably right after the define section for the DSC file, you have one or more include statements to include the package DSC inc files that for which you're going to have components that you use. And so those are at the top first. And then all the statements that follow after that set of include statements are that package or platform specific library mappings, and they can override the ones that you included. What I wouldn't want to see is those include statements scattered throughout, because that gets very confusing. You want to establish the defaults as defined by the packages, and then have the platform that's building be able to override those. And like a second rule that I think would help avoid complexity is to say it's not legal for one DSC Inc. to include another DSC Inc. Right? The nested includes, because that then gets following the dependency chain really hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the de facto way to try to, you know, make something a default that's going to get overwritten by your platform. But I don't think it's obvious if you're not really thinking how the build system works. And if the goal of this is to get it incorporated in other places, then I guess we have to figure out how to best educate people.
I think it also gets into trouble when you have, there's already a hierarchy depending on how many dots you put inside the square brackets and how much you match the module you're building. And so I think where it resides in the file is only applicable if you're all at the same level in the hierarchy. And sometimes you need to have a different library for a different architecture or a different module type, and that already puts you down nested in deeper in the hierarchy. So an override doesn't work quite as expected.
Yeah, and there is another attribute of DSC Inc. files that I've seen that I think is a bad practice, and that is one in which only has statements without a section header in the DSC Inc., meaning that it assumes it's being included from inside of a named section, like the library classes section or the PCD section, and it just has the raw statements. I think a DSC Inc. file should always have the section name, like is it library classes for all architectures or library classes for a specific architecture, as part of the DSC Inc. So you know exactly which section the statements apply to without depending upon it being included inside of a specifically named section.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've seen that cause problems in the past. FDF files get particularly tricky too, because of the way that FV sections are defined, and sometimes people have to do includes, assuming the FV layout, because you kind of have to split the content you're including by what you're expecting the FV delineation to be in the file that's including you for it to include properly. But I just wanted to bring this up. I think it's kind of like probably complex to align on what we want to do long term, but I wanted to just bring it up as maybe like a work stream or something we can track going forward to figure out what we want to do there. There is also some like question of, I think Laming was suggesting to just put everything in MDE package dot DSC include or whatever the file name is. And I was kind of more in favor, if we're going to do it, of putting it per package. So I think like just the way that we specify where to put things would also be nice to write down if we're going to go down this path.
Yeah, I'm personally in favor of doing it per package, and it can only specify mappings for things that are declared in the DEC file for that package. That's
Yeah, I agree with that.
The scoping of it. But I think your problem statement is good. We're for this part of the conversation has been focused on the DSC Inc. file mechanism, but I think the real problem statement is how do we effectively update common packages and maintain those in a way that's independent of the platform development, such that platforms can automatically inherit the updates to the common packages they depend upon, such that those two things can effectively move a little more independently of each other than they do today.
Yes.
Yeah, Mike, that's why I kind of brought it up, is it's like a weak library class binding, right, to fill the gap is kind of effectively the same that thing, right? But
Yeah,
Agreed.
I was kind of intuitively, I think, thinking along the lines that you are, but I didn't kind of nail down exactly what we would do there. That's just what it feels like to me as well.
it's kind of like weak linking in a way, yeah. But yeah, just trying to like conceptualize it so we can think about it a little easier. But yeah, that's kind of what we're doing, right? We're trying to say, I want to pull this in and I want to, pull in an extra dependency. I mean, ironically, the whole point of the DSC library class thing was be able to have control over this, right, for your platform, so you could do what you wanted, and you didn't have to go modify all the drivers and apps and everything, right? But then we're hitting a case where that sort of breaking down a little bit. So, but we solve all problems in computer science with one extra level of interaction, right? So, just trying to figure out what that interaction should be.
Yeah, that's why we have nested includes. I think at one point the build tools also didn't recognize file line numbers correctly with nested DSCs, but I don't know if that's still the case or not. That may have been fixed.
Yeah, that definitely was painful in the past. Because the painful part is the most useful way to debug this is the build log. But if your build fails, you don't generate the build log. So it's not super helpful for debugging it.
All right, I'll put this in the notes. Maybe we give it a week for people to think about. If anyone has a better, different idea, bring forward or use the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other extreme is just going to documentation, right? Like having an FAQ that says, hey, you pull the new thing in and you failed because you don't have this mapped, do this in your DSC to fix it, right? I mean, I don't, that's like the one extreme of just trying to document the failures you expect we're going to have because we changed something in a non-backwards compatible way, in a way that's easy to discover, or Google or Bing or whatever, or we try to build some rules around, this weak linking thing I'm talking about, whether it's just, the convention mechanism that, Mike was talking about, or we talk about adding some new feature to the build system, whatever that is.
Yeah, we're effectively at that state right now where things just break. And I think one of our goals here, we stated earlier for this meeting, was we recognize that CI for our platform builds is incomplete. And if we want to get such that that's complete, and we have this idea that there's a core change that can break all the platforms, and you want to make sure that you can get those updated, kind of so that you don't have that platform break and have to wait for the platform owner to fix it. Otherwise, your CI results are just always in a broken state, effectively.
Well, this conversation kind of reminded me of something else that we might want to consider. And Project Mu, I found that we needed to have basically a PR template, kind of due to the nature of the repository being integrated in so many places. And obviously the same is true of EDK2. And so a lot of the common questions that come up is, today we mostly fill out descriptions in our commits that go into EDK2, but it might be useful to have a template where people not only put in a description, but they indicate whether or not the change is a breaking change. So inside the, at least within Azure DevOps and the way that it parses the markdown PR template, you can put a checkbox as part of the PR message or that they see whenever they're filling it out. And they can check breaking change or not breaking change. If it's breaking, why is it breaking? Another section in there is, how the change was tested. So that way they have to think about, how did I test this change? How do I explain how I tested this change to other people? And then another one was, how was it documented? And then the other final section of the template is integration instructions. And so I think this is like a case where integration instructions could be useful. It's one of those things that as you look at a lot of EDK2 changes, people describe why they're making the change, but they don't necessarily describe how someone should integrate that change. And so many changes are integrated in the platforms from there. So I just wanted to throw it out for consideration that I at least think it would be useful to add some type of standardized template with things like this that people fill out, just so they're thinking about it more, and people integrating have consistent information per change to go off of whenever they're integrating the changes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
that's really important, Michael, because what we've been talking about is how to, for those platforms that are maintained within TNO Core, how to keep them updated when we have a breaking change like that in one of the core packages. But the other customer we have to be very aware of is our downstream customers that may, for example, only integrate the next stable tag. So having some part of our commit message where we can effectively auto-generate release notes of the set of breaking changes and integration instructions for platforms that are moving from one stable tag to the next stable tag, I think would be extremely valuable to all of our downstream consumers.
I was going to say the same thing, Mike. So that the hard part about just capturing the information in the pull requests is it's difficult for someone to search. But if we could convert it into some form that's useful, like release notes, then it's super useful for someone who's doing the integration, especially at these larger quanta of, grabbing tags every year or so or whatever.
Yeah, the PR notes wouldn't make it into the commit history. That would be the one downside.
Well, with our process, it won't in TNO Core.
Right. If you don't squash, right? If we
Yeah.
moved over to squashing, it would. That comes with its own side effects. But
I mean, the other thing we could also do is put a commit template into the repo that people use, but we'd have to have some way to enforce that, which I guess we have, because we have patchcheck.py, which can check patches.
Well, then this all gets complicated when people are doing their patch sets and everything too, right? So
Yeah.
versus squashing down to one.
Yeah,
But-
because they might. Yeah, these instructions might apply more at the series level rather than the commit level.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I do think I think it would be good to have something here. Logistics aside about how we do it, I think capturing that information would be useful. That's the main thing I wanted to throw out there.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, even if it's a Bugzilla E file because you wrote a non-backwards compatible change, right? Then that ends up in the release note somehow, or there's some way to do it, or some tag or something. I don't know, but we don't have to solve it right here, right now. But yeah, it'd definitely be useful if we could figure it out.
I like it being, at least for us, it works well in the PR because you can review it alongside the code. And I find that's useful because a lot of times people don't go look at things like BZs whenever they're reviewing stuff. But if it's part of the commit itself that you're already reviewing, it makes it where people can say like, well, your integration instructions aren't clear or whatever, right?
Right.
It's just as important as the code to some extent.
on the automated release notes, GitHub does automatically create these for you if you use their release process. which is actually pretty nice. And I think it even does some of the fancier features that you'll see out there where they will tag the people that did the commits. And they might even make a mention of people this is their first commit. So there is some nice things there, but again, we'd have to move away from the mailing list driven process. Hey, Rebecca, we're just finishing up here. We were just talking about release notes and PR templates to try to get more complete information for integration and change sets.
Okay.
But we are at an open point, so if you have any opens, feel free to throw them out. Okay, well, I'll write up the notes. I'll try to get I'll send out some follow-up on the toolchain tags. And then we can use the discussion and the next week to think about some of the open questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.